At 10:22 a.m. on June 4, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey looked down through the cockpit of his Douglas SBD Dauntless, searching for something that shouldn't be there. At 36 years old, a veteran Navy pilot, his fuel was nearly exhausted. His squadron had only 15 minutes of flight time remaining before they would have to turn back or crash into the ocean. They were looking for 4 Japanese aircraft carriers that were supposed to be 240 miles southwest of Midway. But when McCluskey reached that position, he found only empty ocean. Other commanders had already turned back. His men thought he was lost. Some called that search McCluskey's gold coin, a desperate gamble that could cost everyone their lives. But McCluskey had seen something, a single Japanese destroyer racing at high speed, leaving a white wake on the blue ocean. The destroyer was heading northwest, too fast for a routine patrol. Someone was either chasing something or returning to something. McCluskey made the decision that would change the war in the Pacific. He turned 33 dive bombers northwest and followed that wake. The Battle of Midway had begun 48 hours earlier, but its foundations were laid 6 months prior. On December 7, 1941, Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor, sinking or damaging 8 American battleships and killing 2,403 people. In the following 6 months, Japan conquered the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and much of the Western Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, planned a decisive battle to lure the remaining American carriers into a trap. The target was Midway, a tiny atoll 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii, strategically vital within the American defensive perimeter. Yamamoto assembled the largest naval force Japan had ever sent into a single operation, 4 frontline carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, along with 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 12 destroyers. This was the same force that had attacked Pearl Harbor. They had never lost a battle. The Americans weren't supposed to know Midway was the target. Until they did. Naval intelligence at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, led by Commander Joseph Rockefort, had partially broken the Japanese JN-25 naval code. They intercepted messages about a massive operation against a location identified only as AF. Rockefort suspected AF was Midway but needed proof. He instructed Midway to send an open code radio message stating their desalination plant had broken down. 2 days later, Station Hypo intercepted a Japanese message, AF is low on water. Confirmed. Admiral Chester Nimitz now had information Yamamoto didn't know he possessed. Nimitz knew where, when, and with what force the Japanese would arrive. However, the U.S. had only 3 carriers in the Pacific, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. The Yorktown had been seriously damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea 3 weeks earlier. Engineers estimated repairs would take 3 months, Nimitz gave them 3 days. Teams worked 24 hours a day welding steel plates over deck holes. On May 30, the Yorktown left Pearl Harbor, still damaged but seaworthy. Nimitz sent his carriers to a position northeast of Midway called Point Luck. The task force was commanded by Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher on the Yorktown and Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance on the Enterprise. The Americans arrived at Point Luck on June 2, 2 days before the Japanese attack. On June 3, reconnaissance planes from Midway spotted the Japanese invasion force 700 miles to the west, not the carriers, but the transport ships. B-17 bombers from Midway attacked but hit nothing. That night, PBY Catalinas equipped with torpedoes made a night attack, hitting a Japanese tanker with minimal damage. On June 4 at 4:30 a.m., Admiral Chichi Nagumo launched the first wave of 108 planes against Midway. Radar at Midway detected the planes at 5:53 a.m. Every available American plane took off. Old, slow F-4F Wildcats and F-2A Buffaloes were massacred by Japanese Zeros, 17 out of 26 American fighters were shot down. However, they bought time for the bombers and torpedo planes to attack the Japanese fleet. Army, Marine Corps, and Navy planes all attacked, but none scored a hit, and 17 more planes were lost. The attack on Midway caused considerable damage but failed to destroy the base. Nagumo received a report, second wave necessary. Nagumo then made the decision that would determine the outcome of the battle. His planes were currently armed with torpedoes for ship attacks. He ordered them rearmed with bombs to attack Midway again. Armorer crews began the grueling task of swapping heavy torpedoes for bombs. At 7:28 a.m., a Japanese scout plane sent a message that changed everything: 10 enemy ships sighted. Nagumo was shocked. There shouldn't have been American ships in the area. He faced an impossible choice: his planes were mid-rearm, and his first wave was returning from Midway, needing to land and refuel. Nagumo decided to recover the first wave first, then properly arm all planes for a massive, coordinated strike against the Americans. Meanwhile, Spruance had made the risky decision to launch his planes at the extreme limit of their range, hoping to catch the Japanese off guard. At 7 a.m., the Enterprise and Hornet launched 117 planes, followed by 35 more from the Yorktown. But the Americans made critical errors. Squadrons became separated. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet arrived first without fighter escort and was decimated. Only one man, Ensign George Gay, survived. Torpedo Squadron 6 from the Enterprise and Torpedo Squadron 3 from the Yorktown followed, but they were also slaughtered by Zeros. In less than an hour, the Americans lost 35 out of 41 torpedo planes without damaging a single Japanese ship. It seemed like a repeat of the failed Midway attacks. However, these suicidal runs had achieved something crucial: they forced the Japanese Zeros down to low altitude. No one was looking up. This is where McCluskey arrives. At 10:20 a.m., he found the 4 Japanese carriers with decks crowded with refueling and rearming planes. Not a single fighter was at high altitude. By pure luck, 47 American dive bombers appeared simultaneously over the 4 Japanese carriers at their most vulnerable moment. McCluskey divided his force to attack the Kaga and the Akagi, while Commander Maxwell Leslie's squadron from the Yorktown targeted the Soryu. At 10:22 a.m., the Dauntless began their near-vertical dives from 14,000 feet. The Kaga was hit first by 4 1,000-pound bombs. They penetrated the wooden deck and exploded in the hangar among fully fueled and armed planes. Secondary explosions began immediately. The Kaga became a furnace. The Akagi was hit seconds later, explosions pierced the aviation fuel tanks, and fire spread instantly. The Soryu was hit by 3 bombs that exploded in the crowded hangars. In 6 minutes, 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers were in flames. Only the Hiryu, positioned at a distance, escaped the initial onslaught. Nagumo was forced to transfer his command to a cruiser. Admiral Yamaguchi on the Hiryu launched a counterattack, finding and hitting the Yorktown with 3 bombs. The Yorktown was severely hit but survived the initial fires thanks to desperate repair work. However, a second wave from the Hiryu hit it with 2 torpedoes. The damage was too much, the crew abandoned ship. But the Americans now knew where the Hiryu was. At 3:30 p.m., planes from the Enterprise attacked, hitting the Hiryu with 4 bombs. By 5 p.m., all 4 Japanese carriers were burning or sinking. Yamamoto, 300 miles away on the battleship Yamato, received the reports with growing horror. He had lost 4 carriers, the very force that had attacked Pearl Harbor. He ordered a retreat. Before the end, the Japanese scored one final victory. The submarine I-168 found the damaged Yorktown being towed to Pearl Harbor and sank it, along with the destroyer USS Hammond. But the strategic victory belonged to the Americans. Japan lost 4 carriers, a heavy cruiser, 248 planes, and over 3,000 men, including irreplaceable experienced pilots. The U.S. had the industrial capacity to replace its losses, Japan did not. Midway shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. McCluskey's decision to follow that single destroyer, the gold coin, led to the most decisive moment of the war. Had he turned back, the Japanese carriers would have launched their coordinated strike, likely overwhelming the 3 American carriers. But McCluskey followed the wake. 6 minutes of bombing changed the war. The destroyer he followed was the Ayrshire, which had been hunting the submarine USS Nautilus. When the Ayrshire raced back to rejoin its fleet, It left a perfectly straight wake pointing directly to the carriers. That single ship's wake saved McCluskey's squadron from the empty ocean and led 47 dive bombers to the perfect target at the perfect time. It sank the carrier force that had dominated the Pacific for 6 months. A gold coin that was worth the entire war.